Hello, Sharpshot21 here, and we are on the V2.4 project for the Voron. Today we are doing the Z drive and Z idler assemblies. At least that's the goal. I'm going to start with the Z drive and we'll move over to the Z idler. And then we'll get to mounting them. So thanks for tuning back in, and let's get started. Okay, so I've broken them down into sub-assemblies. Or ish. So you're going to need 4 stepper motors. I've got the 4 stepper motor brackets. Those will mount something like this. You then have the gear reduction or pulley reduction assembly, the foot mount, and the belt tensioner cam. I'm going to walk you through the assembly of 1, and then I will do the other 3. For these, we're also going to need the 80-tooth GT2 pulleys, the 16-tooth 6mm wide GT2 pulleys, the 20-tooth 6mm wide GT2 pulleys, either the 6 mils or the 9s, the 9mm GT2 pulleys, if you're using 9mm wide belts for your Z. If you're using 6mm belts, use the 6s. I'm using the 9s. Because I'm using the 9s, there are the 9mm wide idlers. You'll also need the 188-tooth 6mm wide belts, the 625 2RS bearings. I've got 2 packs because you're going to need 3 of them per, so 12 total. I've got my 5mm rods with the flats ground on them, the M5 the M5 shims. You'll need 4 M5 nuts, the compressor feet, the M3x8s. I've got M3x40s as well over here. Yep, M3x40s. You'll need the heat set inserts as well. M5x40s and M5x10s. I believe we also need the M5 washers as well. So let me get this all set off to the side and we'll get started. The little blue belt tensioner we don't need right now. We do need a motor mount. And before we need the motor mount, we need the 16-tooth pulley. Now this 16-tooth, I believe, wants to be flush with the end here. Alright, I'm going to leave these pulleys loose, but I'm not going to leave them loose, but I'm not putting thread locker on them. Not until I get these mounted on the frame. You do need thread locker on them, but I'm going to put them on for the moment. Now, these mount to the motors with 4 of the M3x8 screws. These just go right down through the holes here. And I'm probably going to Loctite these in place, again with the purple. We shall see if it's actually necessary or not. The instructions don't show it, so it's probably not. The ones that really need it are the ones on the pulleys, just because they are subject to a fair bit of vibration. So that's your motor assembly done. This little tensioner sits up here. When you get everything installed, you flip it over, it cams out, pulls this away from the mount. You'll see when I get it done. Now, you have two halves of these. The shorter half with both openings gets 6 heat set inserts on the 6 holes. And then there's one hole on the bottom that gets a heat set. On the side with the little divots, the 2 big holes and the 2 little holes, the 2 little holes get some heat sets. So I'm going to install the heat sets on all these, and then I'll come back. Actually, I'll walk you through the heat sets on this one, and then I'll come back. Okay, so there's 9 heat sets. These heat sets have a little bit of a snout on them. Snout goes down, so that you have a little bit of a guide for the holes they're going into. Now I've got this set at about 451 degrees. You just push down until they sink into the plastic. You want them kind of flush and definitely plumb. Now these are what let us screw this together without having to bother with nuts. So there is what it looks like with those done. Now there's 1 to go here and 2 there. so that's how those go in. Need to sink a couple of these a little deeper. Okay, so this is done. Now, I'm going to take the bottom bit, grab one of your 5mm by 60 rods that you put a flat on. Gonna need several of these shims. Need 4 shims per assembly. Three of the 625s, 40 tooth, and your 20 or your 80 tooth and your 20 tooth. You put it through, flush on one side. Okay. So you stick the bar through, make sure it lines up with one of the 2 grub screw holes. We will use both. One of your 625s goes on the outside here. Okay. So you get one pulley on your bearing. Two shims. Another pulley, another bearing. 2 more shims. The pulley is on like this. So here's your stack up. I'm going to have to go get a hammer and tap this thing down. So that's going to be your stack up, roughly. Bearing, 80 tooth, 2 shims, bearing, 2 more shims, 20 tooth, bearing. Okay, so I got the bearing stack all set up. A bearing, your 80 tooth, 2 spacers, another bearing, 2 more spacers, your 20 tooth, and another bearing. You want the shoulders on both of the gears facing the same direction. And then you will want to use either low strength or medium strength thread lock. You want both of these tight to the middle. You want them tight on this bearing. There's supposed to be a gap between the 2 end bearings. So you want one of these on the flat. Doesn't matter where the other one goes. One thing you need to do before you button this up is take your 188 tooth pulley or belt and make sure it goes on the 88 tooth. Because the next step is to take your cover, put this on, and then eventually it's going to go like this. But if this belt's not on, you're going to take it all apart again anyway, so make sure the belt's on. Then flip her over, grab 6 of your M3x40s. And these get run down these 6 holes here. Okay, we are done with this. All 6 screws in. They want to be below flush. I'll put them about flush on the back. They can stick out on this side, that's fine. Now, the last thing to do is to put the foot together. So for that we need 3 more M3x8s and 5. I'm going to use this to set the M5 nut. So I'm going to set the nut first, because it doesn't quite sit flush, but it's close. A press fit is not a bad thing for this. Press fit's not a bad thing, as it will make sure that it doesn't fall out. Okay. The foot goes right on top, or the foot plate goes on top. And it mounts with 3 M3x8s. That's only 3. those 3 down. Grab one of the compressor feet. A washer. Actually, you might not need a washer. I'm not going to use a washer. We want those just snug. And then that is one complete Z-drive assembly. Do the rest of them and then we'll get them mounted up. I'll come back when I'm ready to mount them. I also decided I'm going to put the Z idlers together here. We're going to do that before we put everything on. Also broken out the screws for the mounting on the Z axis, such as the 2 M5x40s that mount the pulley blocks and the 2 M5x10s that mount the motors themselves. For the Z's, you need the 4 Z blocks, 2 of the A's, 2 of the B's. You need the 4 idler mounts, the 4 idlers, the M3x16s, and the M5x30s. These go together fairly straightforward. We need 4 of the M3x16s. Now we're going to mount the idler blocks into the adjuster mounts, and then we will mount the pulleys to the blocks. We'll also need 4 M3 nuts. Oh. Okay. Gonna use one of the screws to drive the nuts through. These nuts do not press in as badly as some of the other ones we'll run into, mainly because these nuts are always under tension. Now setting these so that the adjusters are almost fully out. You want as much slack in the system as possible when you're initially setting it up, so you can then tension the system later. Now, having the the M3x16 through the tension block, there's a recess for it, and tapped into the nut up top, we can take one of our 9mm wide GT2 idlers, and I'm going to have all the screw heads facing the middle. So that's the idler done. This little tab on the side here is used to index it into the top crossbar. They also take two M5s through here. And then that is done. Let me go grab the T-nuts. So these are roll-in T-nuts. And the T-nuts are used for locking these down. So I'm going to pair the T-nuts with the screws they need. And there may be a couple bad ones. So I'm going to just pair everything up, and then when I mount it, it'll all be there. Let me finish these up, and we'll get to mounting things. I've got everything up for this next step of putting the Z-drives and idlers on. We also need the bottom plate for the underneath the bed and everything, so I grabbed that as well. First step. So we get everything kind of out of the way, because I'm going to flip this over. This plate drops in. Gotta move the rails a little bit, or the bed supports, so that they line up with the holes in the bottom plate, and I'm actually going to grab the din rails as well, and we'll mount those today too. What we are going to do is take our Z-drives and mount them. The 80 tooth goes to the fore or the aft. So I'll take off the T-nuts. I have to put the bottom plate in before we mount anything, simply because once the Z-drives are on, there's no way to get the plate in. Now, you'll notice there's a key on the front side, there's no key on the back. That index is off of the T-nuts and the slot in the rail. So I'm going to do the front ones first, and then we'll spin this whole thing around and do the back ones. I need to stick the T-nuts in like this, so the holes are nearest each other. That way you have enough space to actually get the two T-nuts together. So that's one down. We'll do the other 4, and then we'll come back and mount the motors. Time to add our Z motors. These mount again with 2 M5s. These are M5 by 10s this time instead of M5 by 40s. And the other distinguishing bit about these is you kind of have to rock them into place. You can't do it with any of the mounting hardware in place or the tensioner. So you got to kind of sneak it under. So you see, you can pull the belt out, you sneak the pulley under, make sure that it gets in the correct position, slide a T-nut in place, and the adjuster needs to be put in with it open like that, so the little foot is sticking out. Just put it on there lightly because we got to get the other one on first. So keep things loose, because then when you got it loose and set, to tighten it, you push the tensioner arm out. And then you finish running the bolts in. Now, one thing I left open so I can get the belt offset correct. So that it rides in the center of both pulleys if you want it. And then I'm going to Loctite those when I've got all of the belts on. So I'll come back once I've got the belts or all the motors on and the pulleys Loctited. Now it's time to add Z idlers. These mount up here. This one goes here. This little tab slots into the rail there. And then you've got 2 T-nuts that hold it onto the rail. So, time to put these on. Alright, so You want to get this in and you want to get it snug, but you don't want to tighten these all the way down, otherwise you won't be able to run the adjuster when you need to. Last thing we're going to do today is mount our Z-rails. Z-rails will mount over here. I apologize if it's a little hard to see with the black on black, but the Z-rails are going to mount here. You need to mount down at the bottom, but you need to leave enough space so that when we want to clip one of these belt covers on later in the build process, we can slide it under. So I'm going to use it as a shim. I'm also going to use 8 M3 by 8s. As soon as I can find them. Eight M3 by 8s per rail, so I'm going to dump out a ton, and 8 M3 T-nuts per rail. Why 8? Well, because 8's a nice round number. It's almost every other hole, but not quite. Don't forget, you also need these two guides. Excuse me, these two guides for holding the rail on. Now you want to make sure that you are careful when putting in the T-nuts and when putting the carriage on. I did this last because I don't want to flip this over with the carriage on and have the carriage fling off the end. So I'm doing this as the last part of the frame build instead of as the first part of the frame build. You can do it either way. You just have to be cognizant of the bearing carrier on there. I'm just taking a belt guide, belt protector, putting it between the rail and the extrusion to make sure that I have enough space to slot it in later. And then do that for the next 3. And we are done. Okay, so I made a little bit of an oopsie when I installed these rails. I had them on this face, pointing in on both sets. You don't want them pointing from the left to the right into the middle. You want them pointing fore and aft. Fore and aft. That way the gantry actually fits. So that was an oopsie on my part. Had to fix that.
Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps me out, and it lets you know when I put something new up. New videos will be going up on Tuesdays or Thursdays at 8 a.m. Eastern. And if I do decide to do live streams, I will try to give 24 hours notice. So hit the subscribe button on the channel, and you'll be notified when I post that stuff too. Hope to see you next time. Sharps out.